Oh, hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? Welcome to Philo Sapience, where religion meets reason. And I think we're doing our English stream after a long, long while. So, yeah, special thanks to whoever joins. Right now there are crickets chirping, so that's okay. But I hope somebody and quite a few people join later on. But yeah, after a long time, we decided to do an English stream, and there's nothing different than what we have been doing. This is another review stream where we'll pick some apologist or the other from Speaker's Corner mostly, and then review their conversation with somebody else, maybe a Christian, an atheist, or maybe even a Muslim, probably. So yeah. Just saying hello to Mahaden and Kylie. How are you two doing?
I'm good. How are you doing, Kylie?
I'm good as well. How are you both?
Eid Mubarak.
Yeah, Eid Mubarak.
Eid Mubarak.
Yeah, I think we had one probably stream during Ramadan, right? So that's the only one we had, I think, Kylie. That was in Hindi as well, right?
I think so. We did one in Ramzan.
Right. So yeah, I think without maybe if there is a context to this, we can put that context. Otherwise, let's get straight down to it. So, what is it? Okay, HD. I think I'm going to run it at 1.25 if that's okay. And then see, I think quality is good. Premium is fine. All right. So let's listen to it. So just to set the context, and which is going to become clear as well as anybody who's listening or who's going to listen to it is going to come across it. There's probably the caller is a newly converted or reverted, if you want to call it that way, and he has some questions because he has seen something in the broader scriptures where he kind of got a little bit shook away, basically not shook away, but he got kind of some things that he saw in there which didn't align with his own moral compass probably. And so we're going to listen to it and see what it is about. The title clears it probably as such, So let's run it.
How are you?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm good. How are you?
So you're a Muslim, yeah?
Watch your channel all get kicked off for being a Muslim.
Yeah,
I took my shahada after just being curious about Islam. I had a lot of questions about Christianity. My father raised us like a lot of certain things. I had the Bible, African American. I learned history about Bible being forced on my people. I looked at the mosque. He was nervous, so he's like, "Right, go on. You want to come with me?" We go for Juma. The khutbah was very insightful, but I didn't learn a lot more. But the fitra in me, I would say, caused me to be like, I think this is the truth. So I didn't come with the intentions to like convert, but like one of the brothers said, we have 2 new converts willing to take their shahada, and I'm like, I wonder who those guys are. So I ended up taking it, and I've been learning more and more as time goes by, and the more I learn, alhamdulillah, it's like revealed to me like this is the truth. I can't find anything that makes me think that this may not be the truth. However, recently I came across something. There's a lot of Islamophobic YouTubers and stuff. It doesn't shake my faith because there are things that are just like, oh, what about this? What about this? And it's not like, does that break the religion? Does that make it not true? You know what I mean? But say, for instance, this one thing that came across that I asked my imam about, but I wasn't really satisfied with the answer, so that's why I'm here. In terms of, I believe it was the Prophet's companions, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were on some sort of, I guess, like a war or some battle or something. And let me just paraphrase it. The Arab women, they were allowed to take them in their right hand and possess them in their right hand, and have intercourse with them, even though it says like they were missing their wives. They were without their wives. But my question is like, zina is forbidden. Would that not be considered zina? Like, why? Like,
okay.
My imam was telling me that, like, yeah, maybe I don't know.
It's okay. I don't blame the imam. Maybe he's not equipped probably to deal with this question. Some imams are not, like, because these are more of an Islamophobic task. the average Muslim usually does not encounter. You have to kind of misrepresent certain things and put them in a certain light, and then in order for it to be a question. But it's interesting what you said. I just wanted to comment on what you said first. Like, we welcome you to Islam. We're happy, alhamdulillah, you're a Muslim. And I just wanted to comment on an
Between the question he asked and Khali and Madin, correct me if I'm wrong, it's slightly different and probably makes sense as well, right? I mean, zina is prohibited, all right? Everybody knows that. Then there is a special provision right there, because you having sex outside of marriage is not allowed, but there is a special occasion when you are at war, when you are at an expedition, you're allowed to do it. So I think, which one is true? Zina is not allowed. Is that the objective moral commandment, or there is an exception to it? So which one is it? So I think that's it's slightly different, right? The question, the bent to the question is not exactly what is slavery a good thing or a bad thing. I don't think slavery is good or bad. He has a very specific question there, right? Just wanted to point that out, right? Because it's not, he has not said, hey, they are doing this, how is that good? It goes against our moral compass or moral behavior or moral whatever,
He seems to be more preoccupied about a very specific question, overlooking the big issue, which is that you just ended up in a battle and you captured the woman of the other folk, and you are literally taking them advantage of them significantly.
Yeah.
And he overlooked that.
Yeah.
But
he's fine. I mean, his fundamental question might be, and that's what I'm thinking for him, is that, see, isn't that a contradiction in the scriptures? Then how can that scripture be from, God, if there is a contradiction? I found contradictions in there. Somebody pointed out a contradiction in there, and maybe he has that question of slavery being not a good thing in the back of his mind, but his fundamental question might be different.
Right. So he may have presented it like that, right? When reality it is bothering him that what we ordinarily consider to be rape or a war crime is being sanctioned by the Quran, right? But he's trying to weasel his way through it. Maybe that's possible. But if the actual real thing that most people would be bothered about, which is his forced intercourse, or at least coerced intercourse, but most people would say forced intercourse, which is grape, right?
So finally, Martin, you used something that we had talked about.
I'm learning.
That's what I said. We told Martin multiple times, Martin, there are certain words, if you don't use them, that's better.
This time I figured it out. I'm on
no,
a whole.
You stumbled once. You stumbled once, but then you.
No, I'm everything's going well now. Got the mic, maybe not the right mic, but got somewhere. and now the this. But that's what I'm saying. So he seems to be overlooking the massive issue. I just don't understand why he cares so much about. Hey, isn't this contrary to what? Contrary to no zina is allowed outside the context of marriage, but this is a situation that's outside the context of marriage, so it should be forbidden, right? Maybe he's trying to phrase it like that when his real reason is that he's actually, just like every other human being in the world, is bothered by this, uncomfortable, if not at minimum uncomfortable, if not outraged by this instruction to makes it permissible for you to forcibly take your captives.
So they're called the right hand possessions, basically. Right? So I mean, see, this is one of those things where everybody, and even when you go to some of those channels that are against Islam per se, I think they pretty much harp on this point, right? That, hey, how can you allow somebody to be captured in, even if it's a war situation, and then be be forced to do whatever you want, right, against their even wishes, right? And probably that's a little bit of mischaracterization, I think. Uh, you can say that there is no hard and fast, what do you call instruction to say that you can force your way in. I don't think there is anything, but there is nothing against it as well that you have to. So you'll find a couple of hadith which will say no, you can't do this way, but it's a gray area in my opinion. I think Kali is the one who can shed a little bit more light on where it stands in terms of how forceful it is versus whether there is a room for consensual, uh, you know, consensual behavior. So maybe Carrie can shed light a little
So
bit
with a
on that.
slave,
Yeah, with the slave.
I would say, now this is my understanding based on reading of the hadith. So I mean, technically, it is not a physical coercion,
Hmm.
based on the understanding that you get, at least just from reading of hadith, because there are hadiths which says that you should not, beat your slaves and all of that, right? So being forceful would be in a way like be physically harmful for them. I think Islam does, uh, stop or uh, does not allow to physically harm your slaves. I think this is my understanding. I might be wrong, but this is what I understand from hadiths and all. Now, based on that, I would say that there is no hadith which says that you can sort of physically harm them in that process. But yes, there is the bigger, I think, component is the psychological harm, because it's not about physically forcing them; it's about psychologically forcing them, and the slave understanding, slave itself, himself or basically herself understanding that I am in a situation where I cannot uh, say no. So I think based on my reading, that is my view. It's more of a psychological coercion, a circumstantial coercion, I would say, rather than a physically coercing someone or beating someone into submission.
Right, right. And yeah, that's why I wanted your opinion as well. This is exactly my understanding as well. I think there is even for physical, I don't see anything for or against it, right? So it gives me a gray area on that section as well. But psychological coercion is there for sure, right? Because, and what comes to my mind is that case of Safia, right? I think
Hmm.
that it seems like there is a for sure a psychological coercion there, but then there are
Yeah, they
hadiths
have made
that
up stories and all of
yeah,
that,
yeah,
added
yeah,
all of that, additional background and all of that. They have done it, but I think I'm not sure if that is there in hadith. I think there is a portion of it has been included in the hadiths, but
yeah,
again, a lot of it is in the history or the Sira
right.
books.
The Sira books, right, right.
Mm.
So
Let
yeah,
me pose
yeah,
some.
and
Let,
mhm.
let me let me consider something here, though. So, for example, there's plenty. The idea is that you've got a limit to what you can do with slaves, and one of them is you can't physically beat them up, right, or bruise them, hurt them, or punish them in that manner, right? So you can't physically strike your slave, yeah.
Yeah,
Right now, and cannot now. So it depends on the language of what's used, or you cannot inflict harm upon them, right? But shouldn't that be contextualized based on what people have meant by "do not inflict harm upon your slave"? So in the same sense, um, in the same sense that there's other verses, for example, where you are not, it may say a standalone statement, for example, do not kill humanity, any member of humanity, but there are exceptions to that, right? Like during war, you can, right? So that blanket statement, do not kill members of humanity, or something like to kill one human is to kill all, or something, right? Which is really taken out of context to kind of justify the idea that Islam is an entirely pacifist religion, when we know that's not entirely true, even if there isn't anything in the scripture that actually says go and kill innocent civilians or something, there is at least room to kill the oppressors or what it perceives as the enemy in certain contexts. So in the same sense, those two statements are compatible. Like, you can engage in warfare and kill members of humanity, but then it also says somewhere else that killing any member of humanity is a sin. But maybe what it meant was that outside of the context of military warfare, it would be wrongful to kill a member of humanity, like an innocent person. But what does Islam consider to be an innocent person? And that's the big question. And in the same sense, what if you apply this same sort of understanding as to what is considered to be harm or beating of the slave? If, for example, taking your slave and she not having a choice to refuse is something, a legitimate right upon the slave owner, then the forceful pressure to engage in the sex, even if it involves physical, like maneuvering to do that, would that be considered beating? Would that be considered harm? Can you see what I'm saying? Yeah, go on.
I understand what you're trying to say. So, I mean, I think there would be at least two elements or 2 points that I can extract from what you're saying. One is whether it could be an exception. It could be considered an exception through the physical harm principle or no physical harm principle. I mean, in general, yes, this is something that that is generally how Islamic jurisdiction or jurisprudence work. But I think I would say that in that case, the exception is also generally explicit. In this case, I don't find that, at least I'm not aware of any explicit exception for this. Now, someone can infer that exception based on the fact that they have the right to do it.
Yeah.
And therefore they can do it. Now, I'll tell you what. This is a controversial view. I don't know. I mean, it's controversial among the non-Muslims or the ex-Muslim sphere. What I'm going to say. There's a concept of, the marital rape view, right?
Yes.
Now,
before you proceed, Kelly, I was going to say the same thing, because marital rape, you can't, and if you take the idea that you have the right to do what you want with your wife and she can't refuse, add that to the principle of you can, if you have a disloyal, disobedient wife, you can beat her. Then combine the two, you've got marital rape, right?
But
let me what does that
I
mean?
get your and where I disagree with that is I don't think, and I'll explain why. I don't think that the hadiths that are generally presented in support of this marital rape view, I don't think they actually support marital rape. They don't. I don't think so, because if you go through them, all of them are directed towards women. What has been said is, well, you know what? If a husband asks you to do something, you should do it. Okay? If a husband asks you to do, if a husband calls her wife on the back of the camel, she should abide or obey him. All of these hadiths are directed or instructions for the woman. And even in one of those hadiths, it's mentioned that if a husband sleeps angry because the woman did not allow him to come close to her, then the angels will sort of curse upon her. Now, all of these things are basically instructions for women to obey their husband. Now, that is right, but none of these hadiths actually say that man has a right, therefore now he can coercively just take that right from her. In fact, it's seen now, there's a slight indication. Now, it's not very explicit. Someone might say that it's not there. I can agree to that, but I think there is sort of even a slight indication that you're not supposed to do that, but at least you're not expected to do that, that you'll force yourself upon your wife because she's not allowing it, because all of these instructions are for the woman to follow. And I think you can understand, someone might say, and I'll tell you, now it's a very strange example, but let me to give you another analogy. For example, I tell you that, when you're walking in the streets walking on the streets, and someone comes to you and at gunpoint they ask you to give over your wallet and your phone. And I tell you, when you're in this situation, just hand over your wallet and phone. Don't resist. Okay. Now, that does not mean that I'm telling or I'm saying that, oh, you know what, that person has a right to take it from you. Correct? Do you understand that? You understand this analogy? Now, I'm not saying that it is that extreme that you're actually taking it at gunpoint, but what I'm saying is that this is how I look at these hadiths. This is my view based on my reading of these hadiths.
Right. So what I would say is though, okay, that's a fair point, I suppose. But I can see that the Quran and the Hadiths have enough sufficient material in there, and sufficient silence as well to think that it allows for some degree of physical coercion. In the
you can appeal, you can argue from silence, but I don't think you can argue explicitly that saying that, oh, this hadiths are explicitly allowing it.
I think the wife beating verse. I think the wife beating verse does close to the explicitness that you may need. Now, the wife beating verse, if I from memory again, this is not verbatim, right? It's if there's a disloyal, if you fear disobedience, I think it's if you fear disobedience.
Yeah,
right.
If you fear disobedience, right?
Yeah. Then it gives like three conditions. Three things that you ought to do. First, separate from them.
First thing is advice.
Yeah, advise them. Sorry, apologize. Advise them, right? Then separate from them, and third, beat them. Now, what it says, what's disobedience? Well, what is disobedience? Any lawful, authoritative requirements that the husband requires, right? In what when let's say that involves sex, then now he has the right, he's the lawful right to require sex, right? And she disobeys, so he then advises, then he separates, and then he beats, right? Now, so it's not an explicit command to say you can now force yourself on her, but it's an explicit command to you can get her to obey the requirement that you are dictating in that situation by beating her. Yeah,
I think it's an implicit coercion rather than an explicit one, right? And
no. The instruction.
I'm agreeing with you. I think I'm agreeing.
The beating one is quite explicit, and I would agree with that. I would agree that if you look at it holistically with this argument, I think one can.
I think I'm buying both of your arguments. Basically, I'm agreeing with you as well as Kali as well. I think somewhere both the things are true. In one sense, quite a bit of it is implicit, but in terms of that 434, it is pretty explicit.
Yeah. Now, I would agree. I would agree if you look at, and I think even Muslim scholars, I don't know, and I'm not sure, might take this argument, might be looking at this the way Madrin is looking at. I don't know. I give them a bit more leeway. I would say that this seems a bit. I think it's all like any other contradiction. Looking at it from the perspective of, you would say, I'm just imagining that I'm in that time of the Prophet, and I'm thinking, okay, what would his perspective be? And based on my overall reading of these hadiths and overall what I've read, I would say that this is just like a slight, you could say a slight contradiction, but it seems that he did not want, I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit lenient, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, but I agree with the way that you're arguing, though. Technically speaking, your argument is valid. You're right. I would say that. But just looking at those hadiths which relate to this demand from the husband, I think from that it does not, you cannot argue that marital rape is allowed. But from this, you could argue, yes. I think that's fair. That's valid.
So in support of what Madin is saying, also I think that's why I think it's a
and then you take it,
strong
and then you take this to the slavery view, and then you say, okay, they also have, in fact, they have less rights than the wife. They have lesser rights, so I think you might even get your rights, be able to take your rights from her.
Yeah. If you think about it, if you think about it, these sort of seemingly contradictions are probably because we idealize the logic of the situation of the principle to one that would involve a omniscient person or something to implement it, right? But reality is, all principles, when they're expressed, they may sound like contradictions when they're not. Like, let me give you an example. we follow a general principle: do not harm our children, but we sometimes punish our children, right? We don't consider the punishment to be wrongful harm. We consider things that are outside of punishment to be wrongful harm, right? So sometimes when we say general statements like "do not harm your children," that might seem like a contradiction with the statement that although you can, for example, engage in some degree of punishment to your children, you may deprive them of things which will cause them to cry sometimes. You might lock them up for a bit, detention, right? Which will cause maybe a little bit of psychological distress. We don't consider that harm, although it causes physical harm to some extent, justifiably, right? So we might be thinking that it has to, like if it was strictly omniscient, we'll articulate all these, delineate all these differences, and say justified harm versus, right? But from the perspective of human beings, that's exactly how you would talk, right? Like generally you'd say, don't harm your children. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're saying that you're not going to inflict any harm at any point. You're never going to punish your children, right? And in the same sense, so therefore, there is certain situations where you can harm your children. It's just the difference between justified harm and unjustified harm. You can't engage in unjustified harm to your children. If you think about it from the 7th century context, maybe that's what it meant. Maybe that's kind of how the way it was. Like you can't beat your slave. Yeah, you can't beat a slave, but you unnecessarily. But you can, for example, force your slave to do things that are lawful for you. And if that involves sex, then that might be it. And the other thing that kind of supports this is, I think, do you know when? Now you'd probably, Kylie would probably be able to raise this, or Philo, you'll be able to pull it out from the internet. I'm thinking from foggy memory here, right? Where I think the Prophet conquers this place, picks up some war booty, and then they ask him in terms of when they're engaging in this the act of sex with these captives, can they, what should they do? Should they pull out and not conceive, or should they, create the possibility of conception? And the Prophet says, endorses the idea that that's all up to God. Don't pull out. Yeah, I forgot what it's called. It's called
coitus interruptus or azal.
Coitus interruptus. I was thinking about that. Yeah, coitus interruptus. Right. In that scene, at least maybe I'm wrong about this part. It seemed as though the conquering just happened, right? And immediately the women were taken, and immediately, or in a short span of time, relatively speaking, they were being engaged upon in these sexual acts. To my mind, when you read it, you just think, what is realistically happening here? Is this woman willingly submitting to this in a situation where the husband was killed, where they've just been captured? There must have been some resistance, right? Now, at what point does she just somehow manage to consensually engage in this? Right, the husband was just killed. Does that just suddenly change her, make her have affection for the captor,
the killer, the captor? Yeah.
Well, there must be some resistance. There must have been some resistance, right?
And there must be some coercion as well, right?
Yeah, there must have been some coercion. Like, is it realistic? Now, it depends on the time. Like, maybe if this happened 2-3 months later, where there's some sort of Stockholm syndrome, or some sort of love and affection has been created. Maybe, I don't know. But it didn't seem to, when I read it, it seemed like it was happening in the same sort of bandwidth of time, right? And I just thought, all right, clearly, even though it's not spelled out, it must have been some coercion, if not physical coercion. It has to be, because when you're capturing someone, you're taking them. You have a sword drawn to them. You're forcing them. You're making them do something. There has to be some more than just mild coercion. There has to be some serious coercion, if not force. That's what I was thinking. What do you think of that?
Now, by force, you mean like physically beating them up, or because you said that if it's not physical coercion, it's basically some sort of coercion.
No, so in certain circumstances, I think it was. I mean, it comes off very explicitly, I would say, quote unquote, explicitly through some of these ahadith, basically, right? Especially the incident that Madin is talking about, right? In those cases, it seems like there is no other way if there weren't any coercion there, right? So it seems like there is even not just psychological coercion, but also physical coercion. But then the whole stories are devoid of any detail about those things, right?
Yes.
But you would like to think that that's what is happening. But maybe that was the norm, that there,
Not like to,
and
but they might be.
maybe those armies knew that once they are defeated, then psychologically those women of those times were prepared that this is what is going to happen. Maybe, I mean, it's a far-fetched idea or a thought, but then who knows? I think those times were different, right? But I
No, I
mean,
agree.
from our
I think I agree. There was definitely psychological coercion, because I think that would definitely be there, based on the fact either it could be because of you, as you said, maybe the understanding that this is what happens, maybe because of generally understanding that this is what these people do, or we cannot say no to anything they say. Uh, Otherwise, we could be harmed and all of that.
if you have to live, you have to survive, this is what you have
Yeah,
to do. So this, that's the psychological coercion part, right?
yeah. So that would
Okay, this,
definitely be there.
so let's just take this question. Metathronos, right? I don't know if that's at Metathronos. Is sex only for reproduction in Islam, or is sex allowed recreationally with no reproduction purposes? I think I would say, I mean, you can have two different answers to it, right? One is that, of course, it is given more weightage towards reproduction as such, but there is a recreational part to it as well. I mean, the whole concept of heaven is on a recreational basis, right? I mean, otherwise, then there won't be any use of those what do you call houris over there, right? So that's one aspect of it, right? So I think you can divide it in two, pretty much, I guess, right? All right, coming back to that point, Kelly, I think those stories are pretty much, maybe it is quite true that some of the part of some details of those were suppressed because those were whether too explicit to mention later on and were chucked out. Maybe it's possibility, or maybe that was the norm, as we suggested earlier, right? So I think either ways, you can't say with any surety or any level of certainty that physical coercion was a part. It seems so, but at least psychological is obvious, at least to me. All right, shall we move on, or anything else to?
Yeah, I think let's move on.
Okay.
Thing you said about God being a white man, because you see that as you said, if you read the history, you know that the religion was enforced on the African people, right? I'm North African, I'm Arab, I'm North African stuff, right? How the religion was enforced on the people. Now, what I find funny always, and what I say to the people is that, look, the white man have enforced the religion on the African people. Now the white man himself left the religion, and you have the African people defending a religion that the white man left, that was enforced on them. So for me, this is like what's going on. Like, they enforced the religion on you, and they themselves, they don't want it anymore. They left it, and now even though you are enforced, you are the one who's defending it. So it's like, for me, it's like crazy. Now, to deal with your question, because that's a common question, and I wanted to make a video about it, so we'll make just this video is the video about it, and to explain this. Yeah. So there is something in Islam called milk al-yamin. Milk al-yamin, Islam's right hand position. Now, there's a huge difference, and this is what Islamophobes try to do. They try to compare slavery to Islam, milk al-yamin. They try to say that these two things are the same thing. Now, can you define for me what slavery is? Because I want to expound on this topic. What do you consider slavery? What is slavery?
Slavery is forcing somebody into work with no compensation and no benefits towards them.
Okay, excellent. And they have no freedom to escape as well, right?
No.
And they're considered
more or less
property. Yes, they're considered property of that person. So this is the definition of slavery. If this is the definition of slavery, then this does not exist in Islam, to put it completely simple. Now, talking about milk al-yamin, how can you have milk al-yamin in Islam? Milk al-yamin are captives of war. People who are taken in war when you're fighting against another army. The women that came with the army. So it's not like Muslims can defeat an army and then go into the city and take the women. That's not the case. So the women that came with the fighting army, because the army used to come, the women be in the back. They have tents in the back and things like that. And the army goes and fights. So the women who come with the army, some women do not come, they stay in the city, and some women come with the army, they come with their husbands, etc. So the women who came to come with the army, some of them they use arrows and bows as well to fight. Some of them are for healing. They deal, they deal with the sick and all of that. So there are many reasons. So the women that come to fight in the war are the ones who are taking captives, but not only the women, also the men. So milk al-yamin can be men or women. It's not just women as well. It can be both. So it's a captive of war that is taken. Now the question is, when there is a war and we take captives, do we have to make them all? This is a starting thing that I want to talk about.
Is this true? Can you tell me a battle where? Okay, yeah, I think there were men who were slaves, right? But most of these later wars, at least as much as I remember, the captives, the warriors were slayed pretty much, and then only captives, those who were taken were women and children, right? Is that understanding correct?
I don't think that was a rule or norm.
No, for the later part of the
I'm not sure
Yes.
I have read this anywhere. I'm only aware of one incident where this was implemented sort of completely, but I think generally people were taken slaves if they surrendered or something like that, or exiled
Okay.
maybe or something.
Okay. All right, then maybe I'll need to confirm that. So yeah, both were taken. But then I think the issue that here is that how quickly he said, okay, if your understanding of slavery is this particular understanding, it's really bad. But the understanding that I have is no, it's not all that bad. It's like slight bit different, right? You're not allowed to leave. I think even in Islam, the slavery that comes from earlier Jewish traditions, right, where slaves are not allowed to leave. But in certain ahadith or hadith, it comes out as there is a room for freeing your slaves, basically, right? But even then, I think that concept of having them, because in certain circumstances you can pass your slave to your children as well, right? So that's also a possibility. So there is a wide range. Probably it's not, probably if you were to consider Jewish slavery, I think it's not probably to that extreme, but it's still there, right? So I mean, if you are saying no, hey, Jewish slavery is really, really bad, and we are better than that, but it's still bad. So that's what I'm thinking here, right? I think he changed the definition, and to make it seem as if that version that he's talking about was really bad, and then the Islamic version is definitely better.
Actually, everything, and we might need to rewind this, but what his name, Fraser, whatever this guy is, Scholar, however he defined slavery, Muslim Lantern added two more concepts to it. One was, and in fact only one, which he wanted to add, so that he added that in the definition, and so that he could say, well, this is not how slavery is in Islam, because
Yeah,
all the rest
exactly.
of the attributes were there. The only one he
Right.
said was they cannot leave.
They cannot leave. Yeah,
And what they
exactly.
wanted, they want to, and what they he's appealing to is the manumission concept, which is called mukatabat, where the slave can buy his freedom. And I think this is not a concept unique to Islam. He thinks that this is a concept unique to Islam. This is not a concept unique to Islam.
Right.
Yeah, ancient Sumerians had it, Romans had it.
Yep. Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
In fact, if you look at it, basically in Christianity, I think one way that you could be a slave is, let's say you are in a debt, and so in a way you become a slave, you do all this labor, and then you just pay it out, and then you are released.
Become free, right? Yeah, become free. Mm-hmm.
So it's a sort of a early form of, you could say, as one sort of manumission. You pay off your debt and then you do it. In fact, in that case, you are at least paying off for something that you owed. In this case of manumission, what controls are there? Who has the negotiating power? What negotiating power does the slave has?
Right.
There's no price like agreed.
Yeah, I think there are hadiths that. So I think these guys obviously bolster the idea that you can buy yourself out of slavery, and that the captor must agree to that as a form of, so their idea is that it's an emancipatory rule that's in there to end slavery overall over time. So Islam set the building blocks because it was so firmly entrenched within the economic structure of society of the time that it couldn't eliminate it in one go. Rather, it just instilled within the system little pathways so that it can eventually eradicate slavery. And one of them was manumission, right? Is it manumission? Yeah, to basically buy yourself out of slavery, right? So that therefore the slave can receive their liberty through that means, right? And this would eventually eliminate slavery because people. But I think there's quite a bit of controversy surrounding whether or not it's obligatory for the master, right? I think it
No,
isn't.
it's not obligatory.
Yeah.
I mean, if it were obligatory, then everyone would be out of slavery. There wouldn't be slavery in the 7th century itself, right?
Yes. So
who would want to be a slave, basically, right? By their own
that's right.
desires.
Right? Yeah. So if it's not obligatory, then if it's not obligatory, then you don't have the power to buy yourself out of the slavery. It's optional, right? In which case, that's kind of like saying, for example, in American chattel slavery, where the white man has captured a black slave, right? The black slave can ask for his emancipation, but it depends entirely upon the captor whether he wants to emancipate. Therefore, he's not obligated to separate and cut his strings off and let him free. If it's not, that's that's within the definition of slavery, to be able to dispose as and use as one wishes, right? In fact, that empowers the captor, right? The captor can release or not release, right? So if it's not obligatory, then clearly that's not what Muslim Lantern really wants to. He's the opposite of what he's arguing. If the idea is that you're not really a slave because you can always leave, well, you can't always leave because it's entirely dependent upon the master's choice, right?
Yeah, I think he's confused that a recommendation, even if it's there, is equivalent to an obligation. I think a recommendation is not an obligation. That's the problem here.
Exactly.
I think, I mean, what I'll add over here is, interestingly, the verse that basically mentions this manumission, it says it has this caveat of if you think it's better. Like, for example, if a slave wants to be freed, if you think it's better, agree a price with them, and then once it's paid out. Now, Muslims, at least today, they say, and I have not researched it, if that was actually what the earlier scholars also agreed with. But I mean, as many scholars as I've heard today, they seem to say that this is not an option or a choice for the owner. I think the only option he has probably is setting the price, because the slave can go to the judge and say, well, he's not letting me free despite the fact that I've asked him to. And the judge would say, well, he has asked it for you, so just set a price and you must let him go free. So I'll be very clear that at least the scholars today say that no, this is sort of an obligation on that. It is not a choice, despite the fact that the verse itself says and leaves it to the owner to decide whether it's better or not. It explicitly says, if you think it's better. Now, what's better? For whom is it better? So all of these things, I think the Quran verse, it's not clear. In fact, it seems to give that option to the owner. But for some reason, at least the scholars that I've heard listen to today, and I'm not aware of the opinion of the earlier scholars, but at least the scholars of today say that no, this is sort of an obligation on the owner once the slave asks for it.
Yeah, I think that obligation has been smuggled into a recommendation, basically, right? It's just there is no obligation to do it, basically. I mean, that's a very clear thing, right? I mean, had that been the case, historically we know, or at least it's coming from Islamic literature itself, that even after all these verses and their being in the Quran, and slavery was pretty much out there in the whole of Middle East up until 1950s, middle of 20th century, pretty much, right? So had it been the case that it was obligatory, it should have been pretty much eradicated by 7th century itself. and it did. So I think not quite sure why these guys so shamelessly try to smuggle this obligation part and just totally mischaracterize that
I think
verse.
there is a hadith of where the Prophet halts the process of manumission in the event where it would be economically non-beneficial for the captor to do so, and gives him the right to rescind the agreement. I think there is something like that. I can't remember what it is.
I'll tell you
Yeah.
what it was. It was not manumission actually. It was a person who died, and he, in his inheritance, he said that these two slaves should be freed. So he said, in his will, he said that well, these two, once I die, these slaves should be freed. But once they were freed, Prophet said, well, you should not have freed them. You should have given him to that person. So it was not technically a manumission. It was sort of a freedom that the owner gave it to them, but the Prophet said that no, you should not give it.
Is this the same hadith that one of the slave of whether it was Hafsa or some other wife of Prophet, where he said you should not have freed that slave, you should have even instead given to somebody else? There is
I'm
another
not
hadith.
sure about Hafsa, but I'm sure that this was for some Sahabis who died.
Okay. Maybe I'm confusing between two, or maybe it's the same that I'm misremembering. Yeah. Anyways, all right. Let's move on, and then let's see. So what I have done is I have opened the floor, and Valentino is here as well. So Valentino, if you want, please join to have a conversation. A couple of other folks are here as well. So if you want to join, please do join. It seems like okay. Yeah, here. I have it is already pinned. So if you feel like, please join and have a cordial conversation. If you have any topic, any question, anything, we can discuss. All right, moving on.
Do we have to make them all milk al-yamin? The answer is no. The Quran says that there is options. These options, who determines which option to take? The leader of the Muslims at the time, for what he sees as most fit for the situation, most beneficial for the situation of the Muslims. He makes that decision. What are these options? You can ransom them, send them to the enemy, and then get money. Or you can exchange them with other prisoners. You can send them and get some of the Muslim prisoners that will take you.
Okay.
And you can let them go free completely. Like the Prophet ﷺ, what he did when he conquered the conquest of Mecca, when he took the captives of the conquest of Mecca, he let them go free. Or you can even kill them, because those people were coming to kill you to begin with. So there's no doubt that they were coming to take your life. And at that time, there's no prisons. So you can see another option, put them in prison. There is no prisons. There's like, to put them in a prison or something. Right? So these are the options. And the last one is milk al-yamin. Now, the leader of the Muslims, he looks at the situation.
So how handy, how handy. Hey, we didn't have prisons. What to do with them? Oh, just get rid of them. So yeah, I mean, why the hell do you send a message in that era where there were no prisons? Maybe it would have been better when you had sent a prophet in an era where there were well-structured prison systems and justice system as well, right? And probably even better, even better war treaties, probably, right? Not saying that wars would stop completely, and I think you can see the state of the world right now. But at least there'll be a structure to it. There'll be at least, and people will still keep saying that, hey, women and children are still dying here and there. But you cannot say one thing for sure, at least that they won't deliberately go and make people slave and keep them forever, right? I mean, there'll be a huge hue and cry from Amnesty and every which corner of the world, pretty much, if that happens and if that comes to light. I mean, somebody can do that clandestinely, pretty much, or clandestinely, pretty much, right? But you can't do that very, outwardly, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is that they didn't have any prisons at that time. But the thing is, if an Islamic, under the Islamic narrative, if it's written, if it's dictated, if it's revealed by a omniscient, omnibenevolent deity, what would you expect, really, right? The mere fact that there's no ability to build prisons doesn't mean that it couldn't have laid down the groundwork to eventually build prisons. It could have explicitly said, for example, when you conquer these lands or something, or you engage in warfare, it could have laid down the groundwork of the Geneva Conventions that we have today, right? It could have predicted and foreshadowed what's in these international law and international law conventions and international treaties and the Geneva Conventions, about how to deal with prisoners of war, or captives of war, or the civilians of war, right? Which is a far better, I think, morally superior code, where it actually does say that, for example, build separate, keep them in separate quarters and put them in certain buildings. They're not owned by you, but they're being garrisoned. They should be given food, and they're not should be forced into any particular sort of labor, and should be repatriated as soon as possible. Right now, I fully understand that some of that logic might not be applicable in the 7th century. You can't build big prison systems, and you can't accommodate these people in such an easy way. It'll be something that will be merged with the processes of the time. One of the processes of the time was that slavery was very much common, so they just kind of merged the war thing, the captives of war thing, with slavery, right? And that's one way to keep them, particularly when you have bands of tribes here and there, right? And they're not situated in one place. They're moving from one place to another. So the best way to keep these people entangled along and somewhat fed and somewhat protected is to be with these captors. But the issue is, if you just stop there, then you're just thinking like a 7th century primitive man. But wait a minute, Islam didn't come from a 7th century primitive man. It came from God, right? Who can see the 8th century and the 9th century and the 10th century and the 11th century, where it could have said, right, now this is the 7th century, so you can't do this, but eventually create these sort of systems. Eventually, when you have, so that in the 15th century or the 16th century, you have something that resembles more like the Geneva Conventions, right? In practice, where you can actually provide hospitality to these people. But it doesn't show any indication that that's what it wanted to do. I say the lack of any explicit mention, or even implicit mention, but explicit mention of such a thing, shows that Islam just thought slavery was the way to solve this problem, right? That you just capture people.
The very 7th century way of doing things, basically.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
One more thing is incorrect here, I think, which probably Muslim Lantern doesn't know. And I knew it, but I just wanted to make sure, so I Googled it up as well right now. There were prisons in Greek systems, basically, and not in Greek. Egyptians had prison systems. Mesopotamians had prison systems. Almost every civilization had prison systems, some form or the other form of prison system. So it's not that. So only way that these 7th century Bedouins didn't have, because they probably didn't have resources to do it, right?
Yes, but they could have
showcased it.
Yeah, that this is what is supposed to happen, because this is the more humane form of doing this, right? Would be that when somebody's killed and their wife is crying, don't just take them into your house, right? Keep that sense of humanity, right, and separation, and not make them part of your property.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kali, you have anything to add here, or shall we move on?
No, I think Mahadan has added a very good point that even if there was no prison system, they could have, Islam being the latest and the last of the religion, they could have introduced that concept. It wasn't very difficult. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, instead of going for few extra wars, maybe, could have been a good opportunity to show the world that, hey.
Sorry to interrupt you guys. Just give me 1 minute. Give me message somebody. I'll be back. Okay?
Sure.
Muslims, what do we need the most? Maybe there's a lot of prisoners that are taken, so let's exchange prisoners. Maybe you need money now, so let's transact them for money. So he looks what is the best situation, and then he behaves based on that. Now, those people are taken as milk yamin. How are they dealt with in Islam? First thing, the Prophet ﷺ, he said. Now, I want to say also that many scholars, or a lot of scholars, believe you cannot have intercourse with milk yamin if that woman is not a Jew or a Christian. You also stipulate that that woman has to be from a Jewish or Christian religion. That's a big opinion that is taken in a lot of the schools of thought. But now, moving forward, how?
Within Cali, is this true? I'm not quite sure. I have come across this thing. I mean, if this is just maybe later scholars have debated on it, and which I'm unaware that such debates were happening. But as far as expeditions go, I think there were quite a few expeditions that happened. For example, the tribe of Aus, right? That was not a Jewish tribe, and there were captives from that tribe, right? There were quite a few other expeditions as well where captives were taken, which were not from the Jewish tribes or the Christian tribes. So I'm not quite sure. Maybe he is talking about some later debates where there was no consensus on this, but I don't think this was an explicit commandment or explicit.
There's no explicit command that you can only take Jew slaves.
Yeah.
You can even take Muslim slaves.
Yeah, you can even take Muslim slaves. That's
Islam does not disallow it.
Yeah.
If you are attacking a Muslim, you can take Muslim slaves.
True. So yeah, I don't know where this is coming from. I think it's just probably bringing some very fringe opinions here, and that too, I think he has probably not verified those claims probably. Let's move on.
How do you deal with those people that are taken as captives of war? So because they're taken as captives of war, it is a punishment for them that they are captives of war. So there are certain duties and jobs that they need to do. So they will work, they will serve whoever that person that is taken. But in return, the Prophet ﷺ said, he said that you have to feed them from the same food that you eat. You have to clothe them from the same clothing that you wear. You cannot overburden them in work. If you overburden them in work, then you have to help them in the work. Okay. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said you cannot hit them. In fact, if you hit them, you have to let them go free. They're no longer your milk yamin. It's not like a slavery, Atlantic slavery, and beating slaves and all of that. It's no such thing, right? And they can go free by ransoming themselves. So what they can do is they can go to a judge and give an amount of money. There's something called mukataba, and they say to the judge, I want to go free. And they give him the amount of money, and then they go free. In fact, the Quran commands or recommends that the person who has milk yamin to help milk yamin to ransom. If he needs money to help it, to help them finances as well to go free. So this is how they're dealt with in Islam. Also, this idea of milk yamin is not inherited. Not like slavery was inherited. If a father is a slave, has a son, the son is also a slave. No, in Islam, milk yamin is not inherited to the next generation. It's just that person, because that next generation is not responsible. The person who's taken as a captive before is the one who is milk yamin. The next generation, if a child is newly born, that child is not inherited. He's not also a milk yamin as his mother was milk yamin. Not only that,
wait a second. Where did he get that from?
Yeah, I'm surprised as well. I think this is
where did he get that from?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, the inheritance of a slave, as far as I remember, is a valid concept. It's a valid concept, pretty much. It was in Jewish Torah, and it is there in Islam as well. It's the same. It doesn't change, I think.
Yeah, so I'm not. How? From where has he taken the concept that the child of a slave is free?
No. I don't know where it is coming from. I think he has to give.
And he's going to. The only option is where you. Did he say Malika Yamin, right? Yeah, this is only applicable on al Walad, where you cannot, which is a slave who has born your child, this master's child. In which case the child is not a slave. The slave is also, the scholars say that the slave is automatically set free. They become your wife and all of these things. So, but this is a very specific case.
Yeah, not a case where they have children, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, then those children become your slaves, and if they marry within those slaves themselves, then their children are your slaves as well.
I think what he's assuming is that a slave of a master will only be able to have intercourse with the master, and therefore they will only have the child of that slave. Yeah. But that's not necessary. Yeah. You can marry a slave to another slave, and that their child is a slave.
Yeah.
Or a lady could be pregnant. or a lady when they are in or a female slave when she's captured might be pregnant, and when she bears her child, I think delivers her child, she would be a slave.
Right, right. Yeah, I think Madin, are you back? Can you hear us?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can get your attention there.
Yeah. I think I was too damn involved in this conversation. I was just trying to, capture all the
What did I miss?
French. No. I think he's talking about quite a few things that are not there. Basically, I think Khali and I laid down a couple of scenarios where. So what MA is saying is Muslim Lantern is saying is that a slave's child is always free, and that's not the case. There are instances in which case that's not free, because only one instance when uh, a slave's child is not a slave is when he's born by the master, right? So in all the other cases where a slave is married to another slave and they have a kid, then that kid remains a slave forever, unless until somehow he or she is manumitted. And similarly, if the slave already had children, then those children will remain as slaves as well. Again, unless manumitted. So yeah, I think he's saying that that concept is only Martin. The feedback is back. So that those slaves will, yeah, I think I said what I wanted to say. Those slaves will remain as slave. I think if they are children from back in free times of that slave, right? Or if they're children of some two slaves having married and then had children, right? So yeah. Okay. What else do we have? Let's take a couple of. Yeah, I think that one. So let's move forward. Yeah.
Islam commands explicitly to free milk al-yamin. Allah says it's a good deed to do. So Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Quran, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةُ. What would make you know what the good way is? فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ. Freeing milk al-yamin. That's the good way. That's the righteous way. You get rewarded for it. Not only that, it's one of the ways to give zakah. You know, every Muslim has to pay zakah. One of the things that you do in paying the zakah is to free milk al-yamin. Not only that, when you commit a sin, there's something called expiation of sins. So if I make a sin and I want to expiate the sin, a way to expiate the sin is to let that milk al-yamin go. So Allah has made all of these options to free them, which will in the end anyways result in no longer having any milk al-yamin. Not only that, unlike slavery, you cannot take a free person and make him a servant. In fact, the Prophet he said to us, Allah is the enemy of three people, and one of them is the person who takes a free person and he sells it as a slave. That's completely prohibited in Islam. The only way that can happen is in war. People who are coming to fight in war, they will come in to kill you. And one of the options that can be done is milk al-yamin. And if that option is done, then that person, you have to treat him like you're treating your family, literally by clothing them and feeding them from what you have. They can go free. But it's a punishment for them that they have to serve you. It's a kind of a community service. You know, today they have the jail, the community. It's a form of service. Yeah, it's a form of service that you will do to that individual. And this is, I would say, the kind of a comprehensive analysis of this idea of milk al-yamin.
Yeah, that was very comprehensive. And so just to make
Okay, I think he is misrepresented again, right? See, one of the things he said that there's only one way in which a slave can be owned by master is by way of war, and that is not true. I mean, anybody who knows who Maria Kiptia was knows that that's not true. You could be gifted a slave, and that she remains, or she or he remains a slave forever, right? So that's not the only way. He's probably right. I mean, you can't take a free person and make him or her a slave, and that's probably true as much as I remember and I know. But then there are other ways in which you can have slaves, and then they remain as your slaves. So that's also true.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Kelly, yes.
So I think when you look at it, I believe there are one or two ways that I think that do not exist in Islam through which you can acquire a slave. One is, as you mentioned, just acquiring just enslaving a free man for no reason, right? And the other one is probably, I think, someone in debt who wants to pay off their debt, they become a slave. I think that is not an option in Islam. But otherwise, what other way is there in what other way of acquiring a slave is there which is not there in Islam? So you could capture them in war. You could have a child of a slave. So if a child is born not your, but rather to a slave, that is your slave. You could inherit a slave. You could buy a slave. You could be gifted a slave. So all of these options are there. I think except one or two ways which I can recall which Islam does not have. All the other ways are there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think that's why he's misrepresenting, because it's not
The
just
thing,
war. I mean, there
so
are other ways as well.
yeah. So the thing is, though, think about it this way: you can't imprison, or sorry, you can't enslave a free person. So you can't just obviously walk down the road and pick some random person up who is legally a free person and then turn him into a slave, right? But what you can do is, for example, declare war upon them, right, and then beat them, defeat them, and then capture them as a slave, right? So in effect, you are able to capture free people and enslaving them, right? The legal corpus, it kind of twists around it by creating all these conditionalities or a framework that creates the impression that you're not able to enslave a free person. But what happens if you just your motivation is, for example, to spread Islam in your neighboring land, right? And you see the vast economic resources there, including human infrastructure and human labor, that could be a prime asset.
That gives you a free pass, I think. Yeah, in that sense.
Then you just declare war, and if they don't surrender, you can take them as captives if you win the war, right? So it seems to be the case that you can enslave free persons. Yeah, it's true that you can't just go up to anybody and declare war upon them. There has to be some conditions. But as long as you meet those conditions for war, you can eventually take a free person who's fighting for their freedom. You see that?
I think that's a loophole, kind of, right? I mean, you can find a loophole within that system which will allow you to do that. And many would question that no, that loophole is not allowed, because unless until there is a condition for war, because they didn't, they breached the treaty, or they somehow, it seemed like that they were going to attack you or something like that, then in that case you can do that. But your point is really valid as well. Even if none of those were true, you could still say that my God tells me that you have to spread my religion, and so you're free to go and conquer that land, or at least go and preach your religion over there. And in doing so, if you have to fight them, then you fight them, and then once you fight them, of course, then you can have slaves, basically. So it's a bug rather than feature, basically.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I wouldn't press too much on that point, because I get the point what they're making. You can't enslave a free person, and of course, if you have to declare war upon another country to do so, they could just try and compare it to any other situation where certain things are wrong, but in the situation of war, it becomes right. Like you can't murder somebody, but in a situation of war, you can murder somebody, right? And in similar sense, you can't enslave somebody, but in the situation of war, you can enslave somebody. But I think the main issue is that we don't take too much stand against the idea that you can murder somebody in the situation of war, given that we've got different ideas of the ethics of war, right? Just war, right? In the situation where there's an aggressive state, and you've checked off all other options, although in practice it might be hard to achieve, and you have to engage in a defensive war, and then you have to somehow engage in a preemptive strike or something like that. In that situation, you can engage in murder. Otherwise, you don't. And that seems to be something that most people, at least from my people or my philosophical, ethical set of frameworks, they would accept. Whereas we don't accept the idea of the Islamic version of it, which is that slavery is correct, but in the situation of war, you can enslaving people. What's the difference? The difference is that ethically, the murder that occurs in a war we think is self-defense in some sense, if it's ideally expressed that way. I know most countries today don't, and therefore most countries engaging in wars today are highly ethically troublesome, if not atrocious in their moral character, right? But ideally speaking, that's the kind of just war ethic, right? You fight when you have to fight. It's like a defensive war. It's out of self-defense. It's the bare minimum. You've exhausted practically all other options. You've tried to negotiate, you couldn't, and therefore you engage in the war, right? And Islam might try to say all the same things for that, but it's not exactly the same. But the problem is that, like in the just war theory, murder is generally wrong, but in the event of a just war, it is self-defense, and then killing somebody is okay, right? In similar vein, you can't make the same point in the context of slavery. Slavery is generally wrong. You can't enslave free people, but in the context of war, you can, because it's absolutely unnecessary to do so, right? You can't justify it in terms of self-defense. And I know Muslims try to. They try to say all number of stuff, like what if this, because
what if you leave them, they'll come back and kill you, and all those things, right?
Yeah, they try to say that, but it doesn't make sense. It kind of only makes sense if you close your eyes for a bit. But it doesn't make sense.
You are being impounded that kind of an ideology. No, whatever we are saying is true, because you can always find a way to wiggle around these concepts and find a loophole or whatever, make everything fit together, however awkwardly, probably.
Yeah, because it doesn't apply to the whole host of many things, like women, like feeble, like children, who became slaves as well. The children of the slave. It's not the most simplest explanation, basically, to explain it that way. That the real motivation, or one of the main motivations behind the author of the Quran, was that slaves are going to come back and kill you, or because they've got blood on their hands to some extent. That's why they should be enslaved. 1 minute. Just give me 1 second. I'm just looking out the window. I thought, oh no, I can continue. It's all right. Yeah, like they've got blood on their hands, and therefore, none of these explanations work, because it doesn't say only enslave the people who attack you. Right? I think Muslim Lantern tried to create that kind of impression. Right? The women and children who are there on the combat area and they've got bows or something. Really? There might have been situations where women and children had bows, but it didn't explicitly say that you can enslave only those who are engaging hostile or belligerent conduct, right? It's just war booty. It's part of the civilian infrastructure, right? Whoever's there, basically, that you can possess. So that explanation doesn't work. That you're only enslaving those people who are belligerent against you. You're not. You're attacking people who are you're enslaving people who are associated with people who might be attacking you, or just civilians, right? In that area or something like that, right? And the explanation that they may come back and attack you, that seems over general and over broad. It doesn't seem to fit nicely in the Occam's razor sense, in the simplest explanation sense, right? What's more likely? Like, that's the reason why. Because if it was, then it would have delineated and through delicate fine balances between cases in which some people seem less likely to be hostile or come back and attack you. It would have had a more nuanced principle, perhaps. Like, if somebody's demonstrating signs that he or she is the type of person who's going to retaliate and take revenge, right? Then that's the person who should be enslaved in a stringent manner, whereas other people would be given more freedom or something, right? But that's not the case. It just kind of makes a blanket statement over not just one group of people or one war, but all wars through time for the future, through 7th century, 8th century, 9th century. That is just the solution is just enslave them because they could come and retaliate. When that's not go on.
Yeah. No. I totally agree with all the points that you have said, right? Totally. I just wanted to make an additional point here, and that's probably slightly different from what you have made. One more thing that it occurred to me that he said earlier, probably somewhere around in this discussion. He said that all these women were warriors themselves, basically because they were uh, in what do you call the contingent, or no? Uh, is it called the contingent? The whole contingent of these warriors, basically, right? So they were part because they were helping in cooking or whatever, right? But there have been wars where these armies didn't travel with their opponents, basically, right? I mean, these women didn't travel with their uh, combatants, basically. There were battles which happened within their own territories. For example, I think uh, battle of what tribe is that? Most of them are Madinian tribes, pretty much, right? That happened in place in their own territories, pretty much, right? Banu Quraiza is the one I'm talking about, right? Happened within their own territories, and yet those women were slaves. So what is he talking about, right? I mean, they didn't come with the competence. They were there. They were residing nicely within their own, premises, their own territory, and yet they were enslaved. So this is kind of, the contrast within his uh, own thoughts, probably, or his own understanding of how things are. I think he's painting a very nice and very soft picture of what happened. I think it was not as smooth as he's saying, right? Anyway, so Callie, do you have any point on this? Maybe there are a few minutes left on this. Let's hear what it is.
Make sure that I understand it completely. Is like if you have two warring parties, one is Muslim, the other is like non-Muslim, and they send their armies out in the middle to fight each other, and the Muslims prevail. They can take the captives of those who didn't die as Muslimin, but they're not allowed to invade the enemy nation that didn't fight and take their civilian populace as Muslimin.
No, once they defeat the army, they already took the land now. So let's assume, look, I'm traveling we are going to fight, let's say, America, right? We defeat the American army, so now we have the government of America. Now we cannot take the civilians of American population who didn't come with the army. This is what I'm saying, yeah? Cannot take those civilians who didn't come with the army and take them as Muslimin. That's not the case, no. The people who came in the war to fight you.
Okay, that makes sense. You explained it. I knew it. When I come on here, you're going to answer it the best way possible. So
no problem.
Yeah. So that's all I had. But like I said, I very much appreciate what you've been doing. I watch you guys all the time. Well, I watch you all the time. Your debate.
All right. Yeah, I think we have given a fair review of this. I see there are lots of issues with the way Emma has tried to water it down, the issue of slavery in general, and especially from an Islamic perspective. I think he has tried to show it, as if it's like very nice. You stay very cozy with your slaves and everything. I think there is every bit of ugliness that's out there in any other Abrahamic faith's concept of slavery, right? Whether it be Jewish slavery or Christian slavery, I think it's coming down from the same channels, pretty much, right? Maybe a few injunctions, you would say, may have been changed here and there, but otherwise it's the same stuff. And less ugly is still ugly, right? I mean, you can't point to something saying, hey, that's the most ugly thing, right? That's the ugliest thing, and say, no, I'm slightly less uglier than that, and still ugly, right? So at least that's my thought here. I don't know what you guys think.
No, I agree. Keep in mind, there's there's significant fundamental things that they're kind of missing out when the Muslim lantern is giving this kind of positive varnish to this entire storyline to create like it's just the natural, practical thing to do in the most humane form to prisoners of war. or people captive, who have been captured in war, and there's nowhere else for them to go. They might be put into poverty or prostitution. He didn't say these things, I think. I did miss a part of the middle of the video, but I don't think he said that. And they may attack you back.
No. I mean, there is you can go and sell them. By the way, right? This is one thing that we haven't covered. By the way, which,
right? Exactly.
You can have the captives, and see the incident that you were talking about, the coitus interruptus, basically.
Yes.
They were asked to do. I mean, that's what they were questioning, whether we should do coitus interruptus or not, because we wanted to sell them, right?
Yes.
And they were allowed to do that because you can do coitus interruptus and then maybe still go ahead and sell them.
Yes.
Right? So
the thing that he misses, that I think he kind of, there's plenty of little historical things that add color to it. That this wasn't this kind of big coincidence that this was that the slavery that was already in use of the time was being continued just with a little bit more of an ethical kind of code of conduct, right? It's not just a big coincidence that this is not slavery. It just looks like slavery, but it's just something that is, can you see what they're doing?
That was required. It was required. It was the most humane thing to do at that time.
It's not slavery. It just looks like slavery, but it's not really slavery. We're just forced to do it. But I'm sorry, but I can't help it. We have to do this. It's a joke, right? Reality is, people who reads the history of it, it was just slavery. Okay, anybody read about it? You're sold in open markets. Slaves are not even required. In fact, they're obligated, I think, to even keep themselves naked. Slave woman, right? There's plenty of history in Islamic corpus showing that this is the case. They're entertained on slave markets for their economic value and labor value and beauty value, even, right? Sexual value, and they're traded. Okay, it's not just slavery, it's sexual slavery, and there was intricate networks of these things being exchanged like a transactional sense from place to place, right? Under the guise of war and poor captive, right? Poor captive. Now you're a captive. I need to protect you, and the best way I'm going to can protect you is put you on the market and separate you from your children, and you go that way, and your child goes that way, and it's just slavery, right? But it's not really slavery. Hush, hush. The word slavery shouldn't apply to this. It's just a prisoner of war, and the prisoner of war is being now transported to the north of the region to have sex with my friend, right? He has a right to do that, and he can't harm her. He can't obviously harm her, but what he can do is, if she disobeys, he can apply some sort of pressure and then get it done anyway. Right? It's a joke. It sounds like a joke to any right-thinking person. The only type of person who can look through this and think about it this way is the person who just wants to think about it that way. It's like when America comes out with a justification to conquer a war, and the idiot down there just believes it. Yeah, if Muslims are believing in this without thinking about it carefully, look at the history and look at the justifications and look at all the literature on it as well, in terms of legal justifications, and look at the historical acts. It was just like slavery.
What I'll do, Maden, is to point to everybody who's listening to now, to our conversation right now, and is listen later on, is to go and check one of our very first reviews on this channel. Probably it was back in May or June of 2023. There was a debate between Harsh Sultan and I think Qaiser Ahmed Raja, right? And Maden and I reviewed that debate in probably, I think, 7 or 8 parts. Maden, I forget how many parts, probably at least more than 6 parts, I guess, right? And we did discuss that, and I think the central point of that debate, probably the debate was about slavery, and I think we reviewed the whole debate between these two in quite a bit of detail. And if you go and check the thumbnail on those reviews, you'll see that these paintings were painted by some European painters back then from Saudi Arabia, and they clearly depict those markets where the slaves were, transacted between masters and the buyers, basically, right? So yeah, I mean, this has been a practice which was well on vogue or in practice up until probably 1950s and 1960s. So yeah, anybody who wants to check that, maybe go through our and search on slavery, right? Kelly, do you have any point? I think we have been just talking quite a bit, so if you want to jump in and have a point or two to add.
Yeah, before Kylie, you do jump in. Think about the infinite number of possibilities of how things could have been. Right? They didn't have jails, but they have orphanages. Right? They could have had a separate sort of system where they put orphans in their own place, right? Or kids, young kids, so that they're not subjected to the slavery. Instead, they're created into slaves. They didn't have, for example, they didn't want to put people into prostitution or something, but they could marry their captives, right? What was the point of that? So if the reason is to protect the captive, to provide hospitality, to ensure that they are re-educated back and reintegrated into Islam, because the captive has to be re-educated, and or if the justification is even to prevent retaliation, where does the sex part come? Why is how do you justify that part? Really, they may say something like, well, and this is what Muslims do. They come out with all these kind of weird justifications. They'll say something like, now that you've been enslaved, you're not going to live a life where you just without sex. You have needs. So the woman will eventually want to have sex or something. So Allah's mercy is such that you marry your captive so the woman can continue her life and have a fulfilled sex life, right? Apart from, there's no time restrictions to this. It doesn't say, for example, once you've captured your slave, then eventually try to develop a relationship with the woman. There's nothing like that. So this is what I mean by Occam's razor. You need to think about it clearly. Is this slavery, or is this really just like a romance where the conqueror captures the captive, but God creates this holistic, loving situation where even the captive of a war can eventually remarry or find a relationship with the captor? No, it doesn't. It doesn't say take time to forge a relationship. It doesn't even say it has to be in marriage. That's the whole point of, you can have sex in marriage or with those your right hand possesses, right? It doesn't say any of that, and so it doesn't seem like this is something that is even necessary. You can't justify the sex part, right? Particularly, and you can't even justify the idea that the woman needs that, because it doesn't actually say that the husband is missing. You can conquer a injured belligerent of war and his wife, right? And just break the family part. Where does it say, for example, you are the reason that you're engaging in this sexual relationship with this woman is because the husband is dead now. She needs to go somewhere and have sex. No, it doesn't necessitate the death of the husband, does it? Does it anywhere say, like, otherwise it'd be far more nuanced. They'll be far more fine-grained, far more detailed. It'll say something like, in situations where you've conquered a land and a woman has no other support system in those situations, yeah, then it would go down that route. Even then, it's unethical. But I'm just saying that still, it looks like it's doing something in that direction, but it's not. Even if the husband is still there, is been captured, and the woman is still there, she can be enslaved and sold to your neighbor, right? Separated and have sex with some other guy. That doesn't seem like a humane thing that they're doing out of necessity. That seems
no. So one objection. So to add to what you're saying, Martin. Khal, you want to jump in? You haven't said along.
I just wanted to say that this defense of fulfilling these women's sexual needs, I think Muslims have many Muslims have stopped giving this reason, because there's a good counter to that.
Why don't men
What
have
about
men?
what about the men's needs? The
Exactly.
male
That's
slave
what I
needs.
wanted.
How are you going to fulfill that?
Yeah, totally. Because exactly, I wanted to come to that point as well. That was the counter here I wanted to come up with. That if you give that argument as a justified argument for why women were captured and made to, have, sex, then what happens to those guys who are captured? Then you should be ready to give your women to them as well. So yeah, I think that argument breaks apart pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Anyway, Kelly, please. Sorry, you haven't said in a long time, and then
No, I think
just
you guys
kept
have
going on.
captured quite a bit. My throat is a bit sore today, so I've been speaking less today.
Okay. All right, then, gentlemen, I think we should call it a day for today's stream. I think it was a decent stream. We picked up a topic which we covered 3 years back, I guess, Madan. So good. But yeah, I think next time we'll come up with something different, maybe more current stuff, I think, unless until we run out of topics to discuss. And yeah, and we'll have someone drop by, or maybe a few guests drop by and have a conversation with us. All right. Other than that, anybody who's listening so far, please subscribe to our Hindi only channel as well. If you're from subcontinent and understand Hindi Urdu, it's called, it's at the rate Philo Sapience. You can see, search for it. This one has become our de facto English only channel, and Philo Sapience has become our de facto Hindi Urdu channel. That's what at least the plan is now, to capture English audience on Unveiling Faith, and then Hindi Urdu audience from the subcontinent on Philo Sapience. And if you feel like that, if you have any comments, any thoughts, how you want us to improve, maybe if you think you can ask us to do certain reviews, and if you have a couple of videos in mind, you just email us, or maybe leave a comment on one of these, and if we capture that, we'll try to cover it sometime or the other as soon as we can. And if you are capable enough financially, and if you want to support what we do, please gift us a nice mic system. Okay, that was tongue in cheek, by the way. But you can donate to us on patreon.com/philosapiens and buymeacoffee.com/philosapiens. Other than that, please like, subscribe, and share, and leave comment after the stream is over, so that YouTube algorithm picks it up and shows it to more and more such audience, right? So with that, thank you very much. Adios, and see you guys in the next stream. Thank you very much. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Kelly.